if you're a psychopath and you have no guilt about lying in the first place, could you start to tell lies about other people's reputation so that when they
Oh, yeah.
catch you, you are already one step ahead?
I mean, in movies, psychopaths are people who kill people. But in psychology, psychopaths is more kind of people who don't have these social emotions of guilt when they actually hurt other people. And that may help you being a more effective liar.
Lionel Page, what do you think makes some people better than others at telling lies?
I think to start with, maybe I'll put a general thing is that, we all kind of lie, like there's this movie that maybe people have seen with Ricky Gervais in the world where nobody lies and it's kind of hell. Like people just say, what they have out of their mind, and all their folks. And kind of not always saying what you think, for instance, about other people or, your true motives, etc. It's a natural way of going through social interaction. So you see, when we think about lying, we often have a very bad views about lying, like saying terrible things, betraying your friends, etc. But in truth, it's kind of a normal aspect of social life that we're not always 100% truthful. Having said that, you say, what does make some people better at lying? Because lying is kind of betraying the trust somehow. We have a kind of joint trust when we engage in interactions that when I'm saying something to you, I intend for it to be true, to be like useful to you, etc. We have a kind of implicit contract in your interactions. So when I lie to you, it could be, even the kind of simple thing like if I'm late at our rendezvous and I'm just making up a false excuse, I'm kind of making a slight dent into our social contract that when I'm saying something to you, it's actually meaningful. And so when people are found out lying, there is a cost to me. If you find out that I didn't say the truth, there will be a cost, and the cost is going to be bigger if the lie is more important or more damaging to you. So because there is a cost, people, try to manage the being truthful, being lying when it's convenient. People do this trade-off. But some people are just better at, so because there is this cost, I should say, the next thing to say is that because there is this cost, we have in our emotional kind of makeup emotions which kind of reflect this cost. So if you lie to somebody, you'll feel a bit of guilt. The bigger the lie, the bigger the guilt, etc. And so when you ask, who are the people better to lie? Well, if you don't feel the guilt, if you don't feel the emotions which tell you don't do that, it's a bit dodgy what you're doing, then you might not show the signs. Guilt, etc., might show some external signs. So if I start lying in an interaction and I'm starting to think about it, maybe I started getting a bit nervous because actually I'm raising the stake. By lying, I'm a bit kind of cheating. And if I'm found out cheating, then there is potential cost. So I'm raising the stake. I'm raising the stakes in our discussion. And so that might make me a bit nervous. And I might try to hide my nervousness, right? Maybe, my hands are fidgety and I'm trying to hold my hands for them not to be fidgety. And so you have this kind of dance of signs of nervousness, trying to hide the nervousness. And that's what I have to deal with if I'm involved in lying. And if you start questioning me, if you look at what police do when they try to interrogate people, they try to put pressure points to try to identify people getting stressed, etc., and showing the signs of deception. So now if I am not having these emotions, well, maybe now it's become easier for me because I don't have these problems. I don't have this second foot. I don't care about lying. And so people who have these maybe less social emotions like that might find it easier to lie. And, you have this category called psychopath. I mean, in movies, psychopaths are people who kill people. But in psychology, psychopaths is more kind of people who don't have these social emotions of guilt when they actually hurt other people. And that may help you being a more effective liar. That doesn't make you a better person to interact in general, but you don't have these kind of problems to do these dents into our social contract.
Mm. So it sounds like for the psychopath, if they don't have guilt, if they don't have any concern of the consequences, then they don't have that concern to betray in themselves, to show the signs that they are nervous.
Exactly. What we know about the kind of psychopath trait, and I'm not an expert, but from what I understand from it, is that s- psychopaths are able to have a theory of mind, so they are able to put themselves in your shoes and understand your perspective, but they don't care. They don't feel bad when they hurt you. So because you have like people who don't have theory of mind, so people will unlock more when we say on the spectrum of autism, for instance, where they don't understand. Like the other person is just a black box. So if you are like that, then you really struggle to understand why people do what they do. So they struggle to put themselves into shoes and to have a kind of mental model about the other person's mind. So a psychopath is not that. A psychopath can be very good at understanding other people's motives, etc., but they don't care if they hurt other people. And so that obviously means that you have more freedom in social interactions to lie, to do other things like that.
Hmm. And you talk about lying as how it plays into our social interactions and maybe even makes some of them smoother. What do you think is the purpose of our social interactions?
Oh, well, that's a big question. So if you ask about our social interactions instead of communication, is it what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So communication is a big question. Obviously, humans, we are kind of really unique in terms of we don't know other animals out there who can speak, who have a language. Um, a language in itself is a fascinating topic. I mean, it comes so naturally to us that we forget or we don't think about how complex it is. Like, think about the fact that we have obviously very powerful computers who can do amazing things that you and me are unable to. That doing a number of massive computations in a second, which we couldn't do if we had plenty of time. So computers are amazing in some of the capacities, but at the same time they're amazingly limited in some of the things that we do. So you can think that it's in the middle of the 90s that computers were for the first time able to um, beat a grandmaster in chess. Like Kasparov was beaten by Big Blue, I think in 95 or 96. Okay, but then we have to wait 30 years almost for computers to be able to do chit chat in a way which is seemingly human, right? I mean, we can still, when you interact with ChatGPT, you can still feel sometimes that this stuff is not human. But we had to wait 30 years to go from something where the computer is beating the best player in chess in the world to a computer just talking like you and me. And I think that really stress how just talking like you and me is actually something very complex. Okay, it's not something simple. And the reason is behind our everyday discussions. Uh, there's a tremendous amount of cooperation, complex mind reading as I'm speaking. I need to understand to anticipate how you're going to understand what I'm saying. Uh, I need to have a kind of model of your mind, as I said, etc., etc. So why do we engage into this? How this is a very complex thing evolved in humans? Well, the humans really what we in the animal kingdom, the evolutionary psychologists sometimes say that what we invested as a kind of ecological niche is a cognitive niche. So we don't have big claws, we don't have big fangs, we don't run very fast, we don't have a big scaled armor. So if you put a naked man in the savannah out there, chances are that he or she, if it's a woman, is not going to live very long. But what we have, obviously, compared to other animals, is a brain. But the vision that the brain itself is amazing is mistaken because we know from cultural evolution that a human brain in itself is often not very efficient. As I say, even if you drop a man in a savannah with some tools, a tent, etc., often he won't be able to find ways to survive because it's very difficult to rebuild things from scratch and to do it alone. So what we have is that, yes, we're very smart, but what we're very good at is to using this smartness, this our cognitive capacities to actually cooperate with others. So what makes us really good is all the gains from cooperation. Is that we're going to hunt together, we're going uh, to plant crops together, to build a fence together, to build irrigation together. And so that what makes humans amazingly good is that they tapped in a source of gains, which is cooperation. From cooperation, from cooperating with people like us. And cooperation is very hard. That's why we need a big brain. Uh, we are able to do things that even our close cousins like chimpanzees are not really able to do. Chimpanzees, there is some cooperation. They are going to, scratch their back, remove their parasites by picking them up like that. But the level of cooperation is very slow, very low. Okay. So what we have is we have this amazing ability compared to other animals to cooperate in very complex ways. But then one key thing when you cooperate like that is that you have to solve a lot of problems about agreement. We need to know what we want to do. We need to know how we want to do it. And we need to know how we want to split the gains from this cooperation. Do you do more of the work or do I do more? Is it 50-50? Sometimes, plenty of times, it might be 50-50, but in other times it won't. If you are disabled or, less able than me and I work more, maybe it shouldn't be 50-50 when we do a joint work. So that's why communication here is kind of enhancing our ability to cooperate. It's key to cooperate even more effectively. So that's why we cooperate. That's why we communicate. That's what I'd say behind it.
Mm-hmm. And with the lying, it seems it could undermine that cooperation. So you'd mentioned that there's a cost to lying that people are afraid of. What is the cost of lying?
So the question you asked, there's kind of two costs. One is an individual cost. So one term I like to use when I talk about cooperation is that's social contract. So when we cooperate in a group, there's a kind of an implicit social contract. Obviously, we didn't, stop at some point and signed any document, but there's a shared understanding about what should be going on and how we should handle things. And this is our kind of implicit social contract. And this social contract is what allows us to cooperate. We have this understanding about how things should be going, and that makes us more efficient. We don't need to negotiate every interactions. I don't need to tell you, if you do that for me now, I'll do that for you tomorrow. We have, we don't need to calculate. We have a kind of notions of, if I do too much, I'll be a bit annoyed if you don't pull your weight. But we have this social contract which kind of really smooths things. So now what are the costs? Well, in any kind of contract, for it to work, there need to be penalties if the contract is kind of broken or violated. And so in this social contract, there's also the fact that if somebody deviates or if somebody doesn't respect the contract, other people are going to be unhappy with it, and they're going to take possible actions to sanction this violation. And the sanctions, they don't need to be, when we say sanctions, people can think about big stuff. But think about how we go along in our social lives. If you do something which is a bit, outside of what people expect you to behave appropriately, well, they'll let you know. They'll let you know from the start of, they will give you weird looks. They'll show discontent. They may show in how they talk to you that they're not happy, even though they tell you that everything is fine, but you can pick up that, they're already unhappy with you. And that's already a kind of sanction. And if these kind of early sanctions don't work, maybe people will talk about you behind your back. They'll says, don't trust Lionel. Lionel last time told me a lie. He's not a reliable person. And then maybe they'll stop calling you to have drinks, etc. So you have a whole range of sanctions. They don't have to come and hit you up. That's kind of only very rare sanctions for big violations. But for all the everyday violations that you could have, that when you don't behave appropriately according to the commonly understood way of behaving in your group, you'll have a range of sanctions. And these range of sanctions and the fact that you anticipate them are going to make you to comply. You don't want, to be badly judged by other people. So to answer your question, that's the first type of cost. And then there's the other type of cost, which is a cost for everybody. That is in situations where more people are lying or don't respect the contract. There are situations where the contract can break down because the joint trust, which is required for the contract to work, might evaporate. So that's a cost where, in that case, all the gains we have from this implicit social contract is gone. So, if I lie too much to you, eventually what's going to happen is that we won't be able, in our interactions, to have this kind of situation where I say something and you can trust it and I can benefit from your trust. And this benefit from cooperation then is not accessible anymore.
Mm. And how does reputation fit into all of this?
Well, reputation, which is something we really care a lot about, it kind of, we fail often to anticipate, to appreciate how it's a key motivation in our life. And reputation is is not just a big reputation about, your LinkedIn profile, whatever. It's really all what people in your social circles think about you. Do they think that you are a nice, trustworthy, loyal person, etc.? Or do they think that you are a strategic person who is going to, act all the time in your own interests and would not respect friendships, etc.? So reputation is, your in part the representation that other people have about you in their mind, and that is key for you. And that was key for ancestors to be successful, because whenever you want to benefit from cooperation, people will kind of engage with you depending on what they think about you. So if you have a bad reputation, you'll have much fewer opportunities for cooperation. So that is key. It is kind of um, the fact that you care about reputation is what's going to make you respect the social contract. So, why do everybody don't take the shortcuts to take some advantage in the short term is because they anticipate that if they do so, there will be costs. The costs are going to be basically that you lose the trust of other people, you lose reputation, and that means that you will have fewer opportunities for cooperation later.
So we have the short-term kind of immediate sanctions for the individual, the effect on the group, and then for the individual in the long run, a wearing down of their reputation. Are those kind of the things at play?
So I see what you mean. Well, I think it's, typically so, and here what I'm saying is based on what we understand from psychology, but also what we understand from the kind of, I would say, the foundations of strategic behavior we get from game theory, which is just a formal inquiry, kind of mathematical, but gives you really good understanding about the limitations of the structural limitations we face when we interact. So most of the costs are in the future, and actually, that's one of the key insights we got from the game theory of cooperation, is that for us to cooperate, we need to have a lot of gains potentially from repeatedly cooperating in the future. I mean, it's not we always need, but for us to fully tap into the potential of cooperations, we can turn a lot of situations where if we were to interact only once, we don't have an interest to cooperate. But if we were to do that repeatedly over time, then if we adopt a mindset of let's cooperate all the time, then now I don't want to violate this rule of cooperation now, because if I do that now, tomorrow you won't cooperate with me because, if you say, for instance, let's be trustworthy and not make big lies, and you find out that today I'm lying to you, maybe you won't be willing to trust me or, for a long time afterwards. And it is for this me losing your cooperation in the future, which kind of create the cost for me not to lie today. So this cost really is an actual cost in the future. But then how does evolution or nature make us good at playing this game? What we think is that most likely these costs are kind of brought back to the present with our emotions. So our emotions of guilt, for instance, they reflect the shadow of the future. They reflect, I don't need to think when I'm thinking about, could I do that? Could I take this small advantage against my friends or whatever? I don't need to think as a game theorist about, if I do that, there will be all these costs in the future. In a way, nature provides me this shortcut with my emotion. These emotions and the feeling I have reflect this cost potentially of what could happen in the future if it's found out, if people are not trusting me anymore, I lose my friends, etc. And that's the feeling of guilt. It brings to the present the costs which would happen in the future.
Mm-hmm. So if we're going to be found out in lies, it's either going to be a direct confrontation with a fact, or someone is going to point out that we have lied. So in this game theory, if you're a psychopath and you have no guilt about lying in the first place, could you start to tell lies about other people's reputation so that when they catch you, you are already one step ahead?
So I think you're very right here. So as soon as you have a kind of a communication game about managing reputation, which basically, a shorthand terms for that is gossip. So gossip is
that's a good definition for gossip.
Yes, exactly. So
yeah.
a good function for gossip is that you do not observe all the violations, right? So it's not like we're living in a completely transparent world. So when somebody lies to me, most often I won't be able to say. So there's a lot of gains potentially of getting to hear from other people. Okay, if I find out that somebody lies to me 100 of the time, well, that's not often. But if I have a lot of friends who also observe violation 100 of the time, well, now we share this knowledge. Then I'm going to be able to find out other people potentially not being reliable more often. So gossip is very useful. But then, as you say, then now you have this new communication game where people could use that to their advantage. So now I can lie in games of gossip. I can uh, uh, um, create rumors, false rumors, etc., to smear other people. And so what's interesting here that the same thing happened in the gossip game. So once again, there's a right way of playing the gossip game, and there's violations of the rules of the gossip game. And I'm just going to say something additional here is that interestingly, it's a very complex game because the violations of the gossip game is not just saying false stuff which happens to be false and people find out they're false. It's also sometimes saying something's true that people would expect that you shouldn't say. If you, do you want to be friends with somebody who always gossip about other people, even if the things are said are true? Maybe not. You feel, well, if you tell me everything private about other people, can I trust you to tell things private about me? No. So, in a way, when you need a kind of threshold of violation. Somebody has done something very bad for you to gossip about it. If you gossip about things which are too trivial, people will start to think that, maybe you're not a reliable social partner either.
Mm. So then another move in the game would be to find those people who are likely to gossip and to spread things through them rather than having it pointed back at you.
That's interesting. Yes. I'm not sure how often it is done, but you see that sometimes in movies. Like,
Yeah.
that's a cozy person. So if you want everybody to know, you just drop the hint to them, without looking like you're saying it. And like that, that the thing is going to be spread everywhere. I'm not sure how often it is the case because I'm not sure that you need somebody very well known for gossiping. I'm not sure. Often people have normal ways of gossiping. But what I know is that what I would say is that, yes, you have this interesting stuff where uh, uh, people gossip and it's normal. It's psychologists find out that when they measure the quantity of discussions we have, like chit chat, etc. You think about discussions in the office or discussions with your friends. I don't remember the proportion, but a huge proportion of it is what you could call gossip. Is that you're talking about other people, and it doesn't have to be, talking in a kind of, do you know that such and such? You talk about other people. You share information. So, such and such did that. That was great. Oh, such and such had this problem. But in part of the discussion, there's often a part of an assessment about how good was this person. This person did well, bad, etc. So talking about other people, and using our communication to form a view, to learn about other people, etc., is a key part of our communication.
Mm-hmm. So then things where we do discuss other people can blur in and out of gossip. It's not a very clear line where the gossip is. You could start to say something about someone that seems neutral or relevant and informative, and then slip gossip in here and there. It's not clear.
Yeah, if you define gossip just into saying something negative, yes. I think that I'm not sure. And I'm not an expert in how these psychologists really define precisely gossip. They might have a very precise definition, but I think that you can think about the key aspect of it is really managing our knowledge about other people. And once you think about that, communicating about other people can be very general. Because think about it, a key aspect that our ancestors faced, I said, we are in the cognitive niche. We can tap into cooperation. The key aspect, therefore, is how do you choose the people you want to cooperate with? How do you choose your friends? How do you choose your allies? And on the other hand, who are the people you try to avoid or you try to be wary of? Okay. These are key um, problems. If we were not attentive to these problems, maybe we would choose wrong friends. Maybe we would be willing to go with people who are just happy to take advantage of us. So that is really a key problem. And so part of the discussions have to assess the whole aspect of people. Are they good partners? being reliable, being trustworthy, being honest is part of being a good partner. But having athletic skills, being a good hunter, for instance, for our ancestors, is also going to be part of being a good partner. So I think, in a way, why our social discussions talk about all the aspects of other people is because it assesses the whole package. We are very curious. We are curious to learn about how good other people are, maybe what limitations or defects they may have, etc. We have a natural curiosity about this kind of thing. And it is credible that it comes from the fact that information about the advantages and the skills and limitations of other people was key in our past environment. We were always looking for, forming partnerships, understanding whether our partnership is right or whether we should form other partnerships. And so this discussion about other people includes things about trustworthiness, etc., but not just. It's a whole package.
Mm-hmm. Trustworthiness is something we've been talking about a little bit now. What do you think we can do to determine who is trustworthy?
Oh, what do we think we can do to assess whether, it's an interesting question, but I think we're already very good at that. That's a key perspective I take about these things, because when you take the view that I take, that these are games that we have played, our ancestors have played for not thousands of years. I wouldn't even say not 10,000 of years, but more like, our hominid ancestors starting back around 2 million years ago. It's a long time. And our ability to cooperate has grown with our cognitive capacity. And so all that has emerged progressively. And identifying people who want to take advantage of you is key for the social contract to work. For cooperation to work, it needs to be resistant to the possibilities of people taking advantage of it. If we were naive, then we would not be able to cooperate, because if you and me were naive, tomorrow somebody who is very selfish could make a lot of benefits taking advantage of us. So being able to detect signs of deception is key. You have a kind of, psychology, in our psychological history, in our psychological evolution, you had a kind of arm race between the ability to cheat and lie and fool other people, and the ability to detect these lies. Right. So now we get to, I said that communication games are very complex, and that's one aspect of it. Why is it very complex? Is that because when we don't perfectly agree on things, we can think about something very simple. Let's say, Alice and Bob are a couple, and they have to decide what they want to do this evening. And Alice would like to go to the opera, and Bob would like to go to see a sport match. Now, when they have to bargain, to negotiate about that, they will have to state how much they want what they want to do. Bob says, I really want to see this match. It's very important. But is he, could he make an effort to go to the opera? Is this match really that important? So he has an interest here to overemphasize how much he cares about this stuff. Maybe Alice has the same interest to overemphasize how much she cares. So, even in these very mundane situations, we don't have any interest to be straight, perfectly frank about everything. And so our psychology is very well tuned to engage into this kind of small psychological warfare where you detect signs of, how trustworthy is the person in this interaction. And at the same time, the person trying to, maybe tweak the facts in their favor is engaged in this game of trying to say something which is credible, having the emotions which says a bit of red light saying, wait a minute, if you find out here that's bad, trying to hide the signs potentially of self-awareness of that there's some deceptions going on, the other person trying to detect these signs of self-awareness. So that's what you have in these everyday social interactions, and we're really good at that. So when you say, what can we do to detect trustworthiness? Well, we can do what we already do. And, what we do, typically, we cross-examine. So if you say something, I'm going to think, thanks, how credible is that? If I find it very credible, I won't question it. I'll assume that most of the time you're trustworthy because that's a social contract we have, and usually it works. And it works because you don't have interest to lie too much. Otherwise, you'll find out and you pay a price. So I have good reasons to trust you. But if you say something and I find it a bit dodgy or surprising or unlikely, maybe I will prod. When Bob comes back late and Alice says, "What were you doing?" And he says, "I had a meeting." And she says, "Well, what's so strange? There have been lots of meetings recently late in the office." She might ask more questions. And then she will peer into Bob, whether Bob is showing signs of nervousness, signs of self-awareness that something is wrong. She will test for the consistency between what Bob is saying now with what Bob has said before, and identify inconsistencies as sign that he's not talking from his memory, but he's making up facts. So, that's what we do. We're really good at detecting signs of violations of our trust.
Mm-hmm. And again, that's in the normal population. With the psychopath, we would not see the signs in the same way because they don't have the same guilt.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one issue, is that if you don't show the signs, you might be much more willing and able to lie without fear of consequences. There will be consequences. So, but in a way, you could almost say that psychopaths are kind of gamblers. They're willing to take the risk. They don't feel the risk, and that means that some of them are going to win, right? I don't remember whether this has passed the test of the replication crisis in psychology, but I remember a few years back that there were studies saying that a lot of people climbing up the ladder of power, like management, for instance, in the office, have psychopathic tendencies. And I think that you can think why it's credible that it would be the case, because it's not necessarily the case that to select leaders, the best people are being selected. Maybe, to be successful at becoming a leader, you need to tell a lot of people what they want to hear, and not having too much qualms, saying different things to different people. Sometimes being ready to betray people to take their place, or not to do what you said you were to do for them, etc. And so it's possible that if you have psychopathic tendencies, you're just better at this game, right? On the other hand, this cannot come for free. So if you have these tendencies, sometimes you'll be found out, you'll lose the trust of other people, and then there will be a cost. So it's not free. Nothing is free.
Mm-hmm. So the gambling metaphor, then, that they perhaps know that they're rolling the dice, but their emotions don't give them away, so they assume they'll be better at it and they try anyway?
So yeah, I wouldn't say they know, because from the perspective I take is that our emotional makeup is doing a lot of the work for us. So we don't need to know. We don't need to know for us to be playing the game in a way. What you can think of is that I often use the term nature as a metaphor, not that I think of nature as a designer out there, but you can think of nature through the process of evolution, designing our cognition. And nature only cares about us being very successful from an evolutionary point of view. And you can ask, what is the best way for nature to design our cognition to be successful? And it's not necessarily the case that the best design is for us to be self-aware of everything. Okay, we don't need to know why we're playing the game. Nature doesn't need to give us the rule book of social interactions for us to know all the rules. In the same way as, you and me, we could play a game of baseball when I throw the ball at you and you catch it and you throw it back. And we do that without knowing, Newton physics or Einstein physics, like we have the kind of heuristics and rule of thumb of psychology, which is like, I'm going to look at the ball, I'm going to adjust my movement, I'm going to anticipate where it's going, without any understanding or knowledge a priori of physics. Okay, and you can think the same thing happens in the domain of morality and social interactions. We have the makeup in terms of emotions, of social emotions, which make us play this game very well without having the need to have a degree in game theory, right? And so when I say there's a gamble, in a way you could think that nature has different potential strategies it could adopt in the social game. One is to say, well, I want you to be very careful about the cost, and I'm giving you the feelings of guilt for you to respect the social contract all the time. But, it's possible that if everybody or most people respect the social contract, then there might be some niche for some people not to do it. Because if everybody's trustworthy, maybe you have a kind of if you have 5% of people who are not trustworthy, they can thrive in this world of everybody being trustworthy. So in that sense, it's possible that some emotional makeup where you care less about the cost may make this kind of gamble potentially profitable enough for you to survive in this population. So sometimes you'll pay the price. It's a gamble. And sometimes you'll have big wins, like if you become a leader or whatever, etc. So that's in that sense. In that sense, it's not you who have to. It's not you who are making all these computations totally aware. It's your emotional makeup which makes you one type of player in this social game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've interviewed a man on the show who treats psychopaths in prisons, and he talks about how they will take tremendous risks to kind of get one over on the guards or on other prisoners,
Right.
or even to harm their own bodies just to see if they can use that to get attention and things like that. And they have a different appetite for risk.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know if it's because risk could be across different things. So and your previous guest might know better about the risk-seeking pattern of psychopaths in general. I guess my point here is that just in this very specific domain on social interactions, not having the social emotions which are here to bring from the future to the present the future cost and benefits of cooperation and of violations of cooperations, that makes you naturally more risk-seeking, because that means that you're going to be willing to take present gains at the risk of losing future gains. So that's the kind of gambles. I'm not sure about the other gambles. Maybe as well there's they will also take more gambles. But these specific gambles, do I lie now because it gives me a benefits now? Yes, a psychopath will be more willing to do that.
So we're talking about recognizing trustworthiness, lies, and things through emotion, through reading the face. What's happening when we have gut feelings about this sort of thing?
Yeah, well, gut feelings, obviously there's plenty of ways you could, talk about them and maybe different functions. But in this context here, gut feelings you can think of as one way I like to see it is to think about it is our brain is a computational machine. It's a biological machine, but it's a computational machine. It makes calculations all the time. What's amazing is how efficient it is. It only works on kind of 20 watts, and it's not hot. It's not like your laptop or your desktop. It doesn't get hot. So it's very, very efficient, but it makes calculations. Now, when I say that, you might think, wait a minute, I don't feel that I'm making calculation. I can just, go around and do basic stuff. And people might say, I'm not even good at math, right? So how can my brain do calculations when I'm not good at math? But you appreciate that your brain is doing computations once again when you try to have computers or robots do the same thing. One of the hardest things computers have to do is kind of folding the laundry or doing the dishwashing. These kind of tasks, which are super easy to us, it's very hard for robots to do it. So why is it the case? Well, we don't appreciate that when you do something like grabbing a plate and bringing another water, you have to solve plenty of physical problem about, your hands grabbing the plate and not hitting out there, your hand kind of having the right level of grip for the plate not to slip. And then you have to move the plate from where it is to where you want it to be. Okay. And when you have a computer or a robot having to do this task, then there will be tons of computations to integrate, to interpret the information from your eyes, from vision, into patterns which make sense, and to have, to give order of motricity to a very complex thing, which is your arm, in the right way to interact with something physical out there, which is a plate, and to have the right movement. So it's a tremendously difficult problem, and that's why it's only now that computers and robots get to do the kind of stuff that we're doing. So, and once you appreciate this level of complexity, I think that nature wants one problem to solve for cognition to be efficient is we have the efficiency speed trade-off. That is, time and is a key valuable resources. As time passes, we can do stuff. If you spend time doing only one stuff, you don't do all the stuff. And so a key thing that a key pressure on our cognition during evolution time is for doing stuff as fast as possible. not too fast, but as fast as it's possible, not to take more time. So our cognition should be designed in part for us to make quick decision. You realize that if we go to a coffee shop and I tell you, Brad, do you want a coffee or a chocolate? And if you take 10 minutes to think about it, it's nothing in a way 10 minutes, but still it's 10 minutes. Why would you spend 10 minutes thinking about either or? You need to make the decision as quickly as possible. And that means that, how do you do that? Well, in a way, you should not be reinventing the wheel every time you make a decision. Your brain should be having plenty of computations which have already been done and that which is just in your memory and feeding you back these results from past computations. So when I ask you, Brad, do you want a coffee or a chocolate? You had coffees and chocolates in the past. And stored in your brain was the feelings of having chocolate, feelings of having coffee, which are kind of, when you try a coffee or a chocolate, your brain assesses, oh, is it good? Is it bad? Do I like sweetness? Do I like this coffee shop, etc.? These is the kind of feelings which, when you have to make a decision, can be just tapped in right away, which are past computations, past values stored in your brain for you to influence your decision. Now, what you can think of, an interesting metaphor, which is used by the neuroscientist David Engelman, is you can think of your brain as a big company where your conscious mind is actually only the CEO at the top, but the CEO, we think the CEO makes all the decisions, but really he doesn't or she doesn't, because you can think of all these emotions as being advisors coming with reports about what they know. Okay, the computations have been done in the background, and then the CEO has a decisions, and he asks his advisors, "What should I do?" And the advisor says, "This is very good. You should do it." Another one says, "Yes, I confirm. This is very good. You should do it." And most of the time, when you have these kind of situations, the CEO has no decision to make because all the lights are green. So say, "Okay, let's go for it." And that's the way we make our decisions. Most of the time, I said, do you want a coffee or a chocolate? And if you're a coffee lover, you don't need to think about it. All the lights for coffees light up. Yes, obviously I like coffee. Now, what the difficulty only arises when we have conflicting signals. So let's say you want to rent a flat somewhere and you visit a given flat, and this flat has some positive signals. It's close to the train station, which leads you to your work. There's a nice supermarket nearby. But on the other hand, that's the green lights. But on the other hand, you have red lights. You have like, I don't know, the door is a bit tricky, the window is a bit drafty. Okay, and that's when it becomes hard because now you're like, I got these green lights, these gut feelings which are good, and I've got these red lights, and you have to think about it. Okay, and that's where decisions gets a bit more difficult. And just maybe to conclude on that, I think when we call gut feeling is often this kind of feeling that come and we don't know really why. Like you talk to somebody and you have the gut feeling that something is wrong. And the answer here is what it is. Your cognition is picking up on things. You can pick up on expression or how people behave, etc., which just feel a bit off relative to how you all the other interactions you've taken. So you get these feelings, we pick up things from the reality out there, use kind of previously done calculations to feed you results right away to your decision making. And you don't know exactly where they come from. You don't need to know where they come from because when they align, when all your feelings align, it helps you make a decision very quickly.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked a lot about now emotions and the gut feeling and everything and how some people are better at lying than others. What about the people who are really bad at lying, but they want to convey something about themselves? Like say you have an issue with being confident or you're kind of nervous about going somewhere and you know that you'll convey that. What can you do to sort of lie to yourself?
How to lie to yourself? That's an interesting question. Yeah. So, I describe this arm race between our ability to lie and our ability to fool other people and our ability to detect deception from other people. And in 1976, so I'm sure plenty of your listeners know the book by Richard Dawkins, The Selfish Gene. It was published in 1976. And in the foreword of that book, the biologist Robert Trivers, one of the most famous evolutionary biologists since the 70s, he wrote something very insightful. He said, well, if you have this arm race between our, ability to deceive and our ability to detect deception, then you might have evolved an ability to self-deceive, to lie to yourself. And the reason is that if you lie to yourself and if you believe convenient things which are untrue, but which are convenient to believe for you, for yourself, then you will not face the cost of having to hide this self-awareness of deception. So very much like it's a different thing from the psychopath. The psychopath is aware of deceiving, but it doesn't care. But self-deception is you might not even be aware that you self-deceive, and in that you deceive other people. And if you're not aware, then, in the same way, you benefit from not facing the cost of trying to have to hide. So and we know that there's a lot of good evidence about that we have a tendency to self-deceive, to see the world through rose-tinted glasses, where things tend to be in our favor, and we really believe in it. So when we disagree, big reasons why we tend to disagree is that because we actually have different visions about how the same thing happened, but we truly believe in these different visions. And if I just want to give an example, anybody going to a sports match and supporting a team, we know that the different supporters from the different teams, they see exactly the same thing happening, with their eyes or through TV on the field. And though they will say that's unfair, the umpire should have blew a whistle on this stuff, and the other team will say, no, it's totally fair. The umpire was totally right not to blow the whistle. So we see the same thing, but we have an internal representation in our mind about this reality, which is different and which is conveniently different in our favor.
Yeah. You're talking about sports too. You've written some interesting things about why we like sports, what we're really seeking when we watch sports. What do you think really pulls people into watching sports?
Yeah, I wrote something recently about it because I find the usual explanations lacking. So when you ask people out there, why do you watch sports? Often they say, "Oh, I watch it because of the beauty of the game." They talk a lot about the beauty of the athletic motions, the athletic moves, etc. And it's true that when you see somebody doing something very hard in a very good manner, with a lot of style, it can be pleasing. It can be aesthetically pleasing. But I don't think that's what's driving people paying cable TV, every month to watch their favorite championship, etc. You see the same people who watch sports. If they can't watch a match, they'll follow the score live on an app, or they'll if they are abroad, they will try to get a stream, pirated stream online where everything is fuzzy and lagged with 1 minute, and so you can't really appreciate the beauty of sports in these conditions. So then the question is, okay, why do we do these things? Why do we care so much about sports? And I think here the answer is that it taps into our psychology, and the psychology of cooperation in a group. One key thing is that we're going to care about forming a group, being very cooperative in this group, but often this group is going to be in conflict with other groups. So what we care is being cooperative in our group, but often it makes us also willing to potentially be aggressive or conflictual with others. That's what we call coalitional psychology. So we care about our coalition, but often our coalition is in competition with other people. And that's one kind of we tend to think that cooperation is great, but what we often fail to see is that when we say that evolution leads us to be very cooperative, it is true, but at the same time, it's not a black and white thing, because cooperation often is, yes, we are very good at cooperating with some people, with the people we think are in group, but we can just look at history to see that people can be also terribly mean to other people, to other groups, right? Like people go to war, people discriminate versus other group, etc. So our psychology is very much like that, like being very strongly cohesive within a group and potentially being aggressive or antagonistic to another group. And sports, you can think of sports kind of in a low conflictuality environment, can tap in this psychological drive. So I want to go to support my team. I want to wear signs of loyalty to my team, which is I'm wearing a jersey, I'm wearing a scarf, I'm wearing a beanie, and and I want my team to win. It's a lot about winning the championship. If you were to ask a lot of fans whether they're they are willing to win, even if it was a bit unfair. Maybe they wouldn't state it like that, but in practice, if you watch a game of, let's say, of association football, of soccer, and there is a goal scored with a hand, which is illegal, a lot of fans supporting the team will just turn a blind eye on it because the outcome, the winning, is really what they care about. So obviously they prefer to win clean, but when you don't win clean, you don't hear a lot of fans from the local team saying, "Oh, that's a disgrace. We don't want to win like that." You very rarely hear that. So yeah, what I wrote is that the reason we are so driven to sport is that it kind of create a artificial environment where our coalitional psychology can really reveal into being activated, being finding the teams, all mates. We form a group, we want to win, and then there's this rivalry with other teams that we really want to beat, and that turns on our interest into this situation.
Yeah. And hearing you talk about this too, now I'm thinking, if you watch Formula One racing, it seems to pull on two levers about getting this sense of status. It's one, you have your team, and maybe your team wins and you're excited about that, but also the teams are often luxury brands. So you also associate yourself with a luxury brand, Ferrari, Mercedes, things like that. What do you think about brands and being associated with brands? Does it pull something similar?
I don't think, I think clearly brands do matter. I'm not sure. Okay, so I think yes, in some sense, but then the groups we're talking about are different. So you're totally right that, it's, we use brands as a way to signal things about ourselves. And part of signaling is signaling where you belong. But here, it's not groups which are horizontal, like football teams or national groups. It's groups which are vertical in terms of status. So if you look in society, you'll have I guess if you look at 200 years ago, you had the aristocrats here, the bourgeois and the working class, and things are obviously a bit different now. But you still have people with incredibly high income and wealth. If you just take the ladder of prestige in terms of money, you'd have people super rich, people who are like professionals, and then people who are like employees, and then people who barely have anything. So that creates a natural ladder, and people would prefer to be up versus lower on this ladder. But this is not the only ladder. You also have you could have people who are like not necessarily very rich, but highly recognized as intellectuals, and they write books, and people buy these books. And they're not necessarily super rich, but they go on TV and talk, etc. So you have these different ladders, and people try to be higher than lower. One key problem people have to solve if they want to for other people to believe that they are higher is that often where you are is not totally transparent. So, people don't walk around with their salary or their wealth written on top of their head. So that's not transparent. So what people might want to do is to do the kind of stuff which only people from higher levels can do. So if I'm very rich, and I would like for people to appreciate that I'm very rich, I might buy a sports car, like you say, I might buy a Ferrari or a Porsche or whatever. And doing so, I know that lots of people with lower incomes who think it's too expensive to buy, people will see that I'm different from them. So that's what in game theory we call that signaling theory. I signal that I'm different from other people. And for it to work, I need to do something that other people find it too hard to do. Okay, so buying a Ferrari is too hard for lots of people who have lower income. So I signal that I'm rich enough to do that. Interestingly, so that's clearly a motivation. And interestingly, something I really like in signaling theory is that the kind of strategies can be very complex. So you only need to signal that you're rich if people don't know that you're rich. Now, let's take somebody who is really, really rich, like Bill Gates or Zuckerberg. Then these people don't need to signal that they are super rich because everybody knows that. So what you get then, you get Zuckerberg or Gates walking around in jeans, right? Or you could say the same thing for Elon Musk. Or Elon Musk, I think I read that he was not living in a big mansion, but in a tiny house, something close to his work. I think something like that. And if you're very, very rich and known to be rich and known to be at the high end of the ladder, then actually You might even gain from not signaling because you signal in a way that you don't need to engage in the signaling game. And that's a kind of a power move saying, you know what, everybody knows I'm Elon Musk, that I'm Bill Gates. So if I wear a jean, I'm kind of showing that I don't even need to take part of this game where people get a Ferrari to show off that they're not, lower. So you have these very interesting games of signaling where people can try to do the kind of stuff that other people don't. And doing the things that other people don't can be buying a Ferrari, or it can be wearing a jean because I don't even need to buy a Ferrari.
Hmm. How do you determine when it's past that threshold? I've been in cities where there are definitely wealthy people, but they look like they could be just everybody else on the street. And so, how do you even know when someone is over that signaling threshold?
Yeah, well, I think it would obviously depend on plenty of things, all right, in a given situation. But I think the key thing is how public it is that the fact that you're high in the ladder is known. So, you could take the same person and change social environment, and maybe this person would go above or below the threshold, right? So it might be a case that in some social environment, people know that you're very high, you don't need to say anything. And you go in another environment, people don't, and you need to say it. You have a lot of debates, for instance, online recently. It's a recurrent thing about whether academics should put that they are a doctor or professor on their, let's say X handle, Twitter handle, or on their profile. Should people say I'm a doctor or professor? And now that I'm telling you that, people disagree on whether it's a good or right thing to do. I can tell you that once you understand signaling, it's very clear. Who says they want to be recognized as doctor or professors? It's people who are in disciplines which are more academically dominated, less respected, or less respect, who have lower relative status, or people who themselves are in institutions which are less famous. Now if you go people who are physicists in Harvard, pretty much, if you look at the proportion, you have very few people who are professors in physics in Harvard who says Professor Smith. Okay, they don't feel they need to do it. They're in Harvard, they're in physics. There's a summer physicist at Harvard, and that's why. But if you go in a smaller college, somebody who is in humanities, they will say, "Oh, I'm Dr. Smith, I'm Professor Smith," because I want people to know that I'm a highly educated person because I don't have the other signals which are good enough. And so that's what explains the things. But then you take Professor Smith in Harvard, maybe move to a different country, let's say a country where nobody has heard about Harvard, then he would have to say, oh, actually, I'm Professor Smith because my other signal doesn't work anymore enough, right? So this threshold will depend about the kind of social group you are involved, the social situation you're facing.
Mm-hmm. What do you think are the games at play when someone wants to deter someone else from causing trouble for them?
One of the most interesting and entertaining game theories to read is Thomas Schelling. He was writing books on strategies in the Cold War. He has a specific book on deterrence, because deterrence is, the kind of stuff you want to do to avoid war. You want to tell your opponent, don't even try. Okay, right. It's better to convince the opponent not to try than to have to be in a conflict afterwards. Like, in a way, if you look at there's a Ukraine conflict with Russia, a failure was to deter Russia to invade. If the Western countries had convinced Russia to not invade, then the situation would be much better. So there was a failure of deterrence. So deterrence is key to plenty of conflictual situation. So now, how do we do that? Well, it's a complex thing, deterrence, because if I don't want you to do an action which I don't like, you might be totally aware of that. Now, a problem is that often, once you do something I don't like, it's very costly for me to retaliate, right? And you might know it. Because you know it, you think, well, you can say whatever, Lionel. I know you'll be pissed off, but you won't do anything about it. So you feel free to act. So to deter, I have a credibility problem. Let's say, for instance, like a company, a salesman sells me something, and I'm not happy with it. If, it's too bothersome for me to lodge a complaint, then the salesman can sell me something which is not great, because most likely I won't even complain. So the salesman then doesn't have an incentive to sell me something which is good, because he or she knows that I won't do anything if I'm not happy with the good. Okay, so that's a problem. So I need to resolve that to avoid the other person to take advantage of me. I need to be credible into the fact that I would retaliate if somebody hurt me or don't respect me or do something I don't like. I would be willing to engage in costly actions, costly to me, but that would induce a cost for the other person. And because of this credibility issue, maybe our emotional makeup is designed to help us solve that by pushing us to be willing to retaliate in a way which is credible. So, if a salesman sells me something which is bad, maybe I'm going to be angry enough, to feel anger enough to be willing to punish. And for me to be credible, then this emotion of anger needs to come with signs. So I need to be really angry at some point, because if I'm never angry, really, I'm not credible. People could say, oh, Lionel pretends to be angry, but he's really a pushover. So I need to be able and willing to, able to experience anger, which drives me to act in a way. But at the same time, beforehand, I need to, have the right signs that I might get angry. So let's say, you buy something in a shop and you go back in the shop and you say, sorry, but the stuff you sold me is not good. I want a compensation. Then the shop has several options. You could say, well, sorry, this is not our policy. Or say, oh, it's not in our policy, but for you, we want you to be happy. So we'll give you another compensation or whatever. For them to be more willing to do the right stuff, it's better if they anticipate that if they are not behaving right towards you, you are going to be unhappy, you will retaliate. Maybe you're going to write a review on a website, saying this shop, avoid this shop, it's not bad, it's not good. But, writing a review, if they don't compensate you, will bring you zero benefit. You might spend 10, 15 minutes writing your review. You'll still not have received any compensation. So it's a cost for you. But so for you to be willing to engage in this cost, you need to feel anger, and anger will drive you to write a post and to feel good about having spent this time doing that. And then for it to work, when you discuss at the shop, you should show signs of anger, which are credibly showing that you would engage in retaliatory actions if nothing happens. And so that's the game we play. To deter people from taking advantage of you, we need to be willing to take retaliatory actions if people do something bad. And then we need to be able to signal credibly that's what's going to happen. And in lots of our social interactions, we have this emotional makeup, which signal, wait a minute, I might be willing eventually to engage in costly things for me to retaliate against you if you don't do the right thing by me now. We need to be very credible into signaling these things and actually being able to follow through afterwards for the credibility to work as a threat.
And so we're showing that we would do something like bothering to waste 15 minutes to write that review, even when we're not going to get anything back in return. So would we need to show that we are irrational actors?
Yeah, so that's exactly the right question to ask. We might think that being rational, that is always making the right, best decision in terms of payoffs now, is the right thing to be in all situations. But one paradox of rationality, which was pointed by this game theorist, Thomas Shelley, is that in many strategic interactions, in many strategic situations, it can be a disadvantage to have more options. So, if you look in history, some generals, they go in a territory and the opposition might think, they could decide to fight or potentially to retreat. If I want to signal that I really don't want to retreat and I don't want to have this option later on to retreat, I can burn the bridges. I can burn the bridges behind me. By burning the bridges behind me, I signal to my opponent that I'm really committed to this aggression, to this antagonistic action. And so I might increase my chance of getting my opponent to back down because the opponent knows that I'm not bluffing. So to shrink the actions that are available to you tomorrow, might actually to tie your hand, sometimes might increase your chances of success. And so, we talk about war, for instance, we talk about Ukraine and Russia. Something that, for instance, you could have done before the war, you could have sent Western soldiers in Ukraine, saying, and that's a suggestion from Thomas Schelling, kind of strategy you can do. He was talking, by the way, about things like, the Berlin Wall. It was a time where Russia could have decided to seize Western Berlin, right? So he said, what you can do, you can send 1,000 American soldiers in Western Berlin, and if ever, one of them is armed, then we know that the American police is going to support engaging America in a conflict. And so that's a credible signal that we would move in the conflict if ever Russia was invading. So you commit yourself by removing the opportunity afterwards to back down. And removing the opportunity afterwards to back down makes you better able at deterring an antagonistic action against you now.
Mm-hmm. So in the case of something like nuclear war, we would want to show that we are not going to act rationally. We're just going to avenge. We are going to respond.
Yes, exactly.
Is that sort of the idea?
Well, it's very interesting here because nobody wants a nuclear war, right? That seems completely crazy. And when you look at the strategic thinking in the Cold War about a nuclear war, people had to scramble very quickly to change totally their strategic thinking about war in the nuclear era. It's easy for us to forget, but people had conventional weapons until 1945, and then suddenly the US has nuclear weapons, and then I think shortly after, maybe something like 51, or early in the 50s or late in the 40s, Russia had a nuclear bomb as well. So that totally changed the game. And then you have to think about what would happen. What would happen in these kind of situations, because you have a key problem of credibility. I might say, if you attack me, I launch a nuclear weapon, but what does this mean? Let's say that Russia land some forces in Alaska. Should you engage in nuclear retaliation against Russia? Well, maybe, but maybe you should say, well, maybe we should send another conventional force to fight them in Alaska instead of risking a global, nuclear meltdown. So what is the best decision? We know that people will be very unwilling to engage into nuclear retaliation. There were a lot of games, strategic games done in the RAND Corporation in the US at that time to put people in war game situations to see what they would do. And interestingly, they say the hardest thing we found, the most surprising thing we found in these war games, is that it was people unwillingness to engage in nuclear warfare. So people were basically hesitating, trying to push further away the time where they're going to press a button. So we have to solve this problem. And so what Thomas Schelling says is that, yes, you want to signal that you're ready to engage in that, which might require you to look a bit crazy. Because if you are very rational, why would you do that? The costs are so huge. So signaling that you'll be crazy might actually help. But only saying I'm crazy is not going to work. I can tell you I'm crazy, I would use my bomb. So yeah, obviously you would say that. You want me to believe you're crazy, but I think you're not crazy enough. And you can see that once you see that, you understand a lot of the discussions in this kind of conflict where, if you look, the people says, we would be willing to, and the other person says, I might be willing to, etc. But actually nobody's using it. So what Thomas Schelling says is that for it to be credible, you need to actually do things which are risky, because you signal by the riskiness of your actions that you're actually a bit crazy. And he called the game of, brinkmanship. Brinkmanship is when you're willing to go to the brink. And going to the brink is going to a place where there's actually a risk of slipping off the cliff, right? So the brinkmanship is you have to be close enough from the cliff that for random reasons, you could trip and things could go wrong. If you always want to stay safe, you will not be able to signal that you're credible, and other people will take advantage of it. So the maybe unfortunate insight we get from this thing is that actually there is no safe way of playing this game. If you want to stay safe in the nuclear era, says we're never going to use our nuclear bombs, then they're useless. If you want to be respected and to deter opponents, you need to engage in actions which are a bit risky, which signals that yes, you don't want to, but you might be drawn into a situation where you will have to. You need to do that credibly, to be on the brink, to credibly deter your opponent.
Mm. Well, this is interesting. I've interviewed a nuclear war expert, and one thing that North Korea does that nobody else does is when North Korea tests an intercontinental ballistic missile, the kind that could launch a nuclear weapon, say, into the US, They don't warn anybody. All the other countries let the other countries know, hey, we're doing this. It's not a nuclear weapon. But North Korea will just launch them and not tell anybody. And so it puts everybody on edge
Totally.
whenever North Korea tests a missile.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. And the North Korea problem they have, they're a small country. And there was a war against the US. I mean, we see they were held by China, but there was a war against the US, and you could also think of a situation where there could be a war with China, right? So it's a small country with big powers who could be willing to engage against it. And so being credible is a key aspect. And also, obviously, they don't have the kind of balance and protections around the power of the leadership. So leadership can do pretty much what they want. And so they are clearly engaging in crazy looking things from our point of view. And I guess are credible enough to tell, I don't know, other countries, don't mess up with me, because yes, I'm crazy enough to do things which would be very, very costly. I mean, I guess nobody wants to invade North Korea, so they don't have a problem. But if there was a conflict, I'm pretty sure that they have built such a reputation of being crazy enough that you don't want to mess with them.
Yeah. For you, what is it like to see these games around you in life?
That's an interesting question. Yeah. So my perspective here is that is very. If I go back to the foundations of life, I think that. Well, maybe I should start saying. Okay, I think that a lot of where we see social interactions and life, etc., are through narratives which are often just very superficial and artificial. So we think about why people behave in the way, and we have like cultural stories and psychological motivation, etc. And a lot of these, not as false, but often is often just an above level, a superficial layer of reality. When you go back more at the basis of what's happening in life, well, you have to take an evolutionary perspective, because we are organisms designed by evolution. And evolution is something which is an organism's good at surviving the environment and reproducing and have offspring. Okay, so you start from that, and then everything makes sense in an evolutionary way. But because evolution is a blind process, but because evolution, select organisms which are good at something, which are good at making decisions in their environment, then a natural language to understand what's happening with organisms is the study of optimal decision making. And what would we expect organisms to be making as the best decision possible if we think that evolution has been very good at pushing toward organisms making good decisions? And evolution had like eons of time to do that. People, it's all intuition with evolution. Often people say evolution cannot do that. It's because people don't appreciate the time scale of evolution, or mind, which is set to work, to understand decades of years, struggle to understand things like a million year, or even less, a billion year. So evolution had a lot of time to design organisms progressively for them to be very, very good at making the kind of decisions they have to make in their environment. And so this point of view is that then the right way of trying to understand things like cognition, psychology, is to look at the theory of optimal decision making. And in social sciences, the science of which looks at optimal decision making is economics and game theory. So which can be seen as a part of economics. So when I say that, a lot of people might not understand it, because when they think about an economist, they think an economist is, a guy or a woman, maybe, talking on TV about GDP and growth, etc. But that's only one part of economics, which is about macroeconomics. Economics really, at the heart of it, is a science about decision making. How do you allocate resources? You have limited resources and you have potentially unlimited needs. So how do you allocate limited resources to unlimited needs? And it has built a huge kind of conceptual framework about how do you make the best decision possible. So this conceptual framework about optimal decision making, I think, is a natural one to think about our psychology and to ask the question, and to look for behind all our actions and folks, what are the problems being solved and how our psychology might be tuned to solve this problem in the best way possible. So when you ask me what I see behind the games, uh, what I think is that the grammar of our interactions is a grammar of people with is game theory, which studies how people with imperfectly aligned incentives can work together, make a lot of benefits gains from cooperations, but at the same time there can be a lot of conflict. And game theory gives us so many rich insights about how to understand that when you get these insights and you look back at a lot of things happening in society, it can really make sense that things which looks very strange, behaviors which look puzzling, actually can be explained as being the right behavior, the strategic behavior, even when we don't think about it. Because as I say, you have the emotions to play these games. You don't need to think that you play these games, and we understand the many strange ways we behave because actually that's the right way to behave when we are involved in these very complex games.
Yeah. Well, Lionel Page, you apply this to so many fields. For people who want to follow along with you, before we get to our last topic, where's the best place to look for you online?
Yeah, so online I've got a Substack. It's called Optimally Irrational, where I talk about these. I apply this length of using economics and game theory as a grammar of life to talk about range of things from psychology. I've talked a lot about, for instance, the psychology of happiness. I talked about coalitional psychology, and now I'm talking about morality and fairness to explain how you can really use game theory to provide a very interesting and in my view, very convincing view about happiness. So that I've got this Substack, and for people interested in this perspective, I also got a book published in 2022 with the same name, Optimally Irrational.
Great. We'll put links in the description for people to check out. And Lionel, my last topic is what I do, interviews. First of all,
Okay.
what do you think is the game of an interview?
Oh, very interesting thing. So, I see games everywhere, so I can answer a question. So I wrote recently a post on what do we do on social media. And I think that it's very interesting what we do on social media. First, I was talking of ladder of status. And the ladder of status on social media is your kind of relative standing in the um, uh, among the set of social media influencers or whatever. And so there is clearly a competition for attention. So people have limited attention. There's so much time they can spend listening to podcasts, for instance. And so as a podcaster, I would say that you have to engage in this game, trying to grab the attention of people. So the kind of thing that you have to solve is what are the kind of topics which could be interesting for an audience which is not already overly exposed to plenty of similar things, because you want to find a topic which is going to interest enough people, but not with all the other podcasters already doing that. So, the kind of competitive races which happens between podcasters would be finding the interesting things that not everybody talked about it already. So that's one thing. And then there's an interesting within the interview. The kind of game is that I would say, when I was saying we have not perfectly aligned interest, I think that's a good example because you get an interviewee. The interviewee wants to talk about the stuff he or she is doing. The interviewee might have an interesting motivation for these ideas to be in the public. The interviewer might have also, a book to sell. It's good to go on the podcast and talk about the book. But this is the interest of the interviewee. The interest of the podcast is partly aligned because obviously the podcaster is interested in the topic. But maybe sometimes, the interviewee might be rambling around, talking about stuff way too long. For instance, I'm aware that I'm making very long answers. And the podcaster might think, oh my God, I'm going to lose my listeners because the answer is too long. And so you have not totally perfectly aligned incentives. You might want to interject or to cut the interviewee to go back on the kind of topics that you think are most relevant for your audience, which is maybe not the kind of pet stories that the interviewee has in mind. So you have this very interesting game of communication between the two as well. Yeah.
And what do you think makes a good experience for the interviewee?
So my experience is that what is very interesting is that when the interviewer like knows the topic very well, has been thinking, is aware about this thing, so the questions comes naturally, and then you can have interactions because uh, it's not necessarily mechanical. So I think when you have a natural interest, uh, you raise questions which are meaningful and relevant automatically. So that's my personal experience.
Yeah. And what do you think can be done to make the interview show attractive to other interviewees in the future?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think that I would suspect that given that you have quite a few followers or subscribers, you know the answer better than I would. Add on that, that part of my stance is that I believe people are really good at what they're doing. That's what I'm saying. And so I think that it's too often social scientists have in the past come out of situations thinking that they know better than people. So they're going to explain why people are making silly mistakes, etc. My take is that we should be very careful to assume that we know better than people. People who do that all the time. There's a real, and I'm very serious about that, there's a real practical expertise down in the fact that people have been solving problems repeatedly in their environment. So I think it's reasonable when you look at people making decisions in an environment to start assuming that they likely know how to do this thing pretty well. And what we want to understand is how they do it, more than coming from outside and thinking that we know better than them.
Hmm. Well, Lionel Page, for operating from that place and communicating in a way that is understandable and interesting, and for taking this interview, thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian.